Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this workshop. My name is Joshua Howdy, and I'm a part of the CAVE team. Today, I, along with my colleague Alma, will be supporting you with any questions and monitoring the chat throughout the session. I will also be the session's timekeeper, so you may hear a verbal reminder when our time is coming to an end. But with that said, I'm excited to introduce our board member, representative of our Region 5 representative, Elena Esquer, for this workshop. Thank you and have a wonderful session.
Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited to welcome all of you today to this very important topic. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our presenters today, Dr. Carolina Serna and Dr. Mickie Wong-Lo. They are both associate professors in the School of Education at Biola University. Carolina began her teaching career as a third grade bilingual teacher, and this experience at the elementary level in rural, inner city, and suburban settings, and at the university level continues to inform her teaching and her research. Her areas of research include literacy development in sociocultural contexts, teacher preparation, and bilingual education as they relate to linguistically and culturally diverse students. Her recent research focused on English learners on the Central California coast who speak Triqui, an indigenous Mexican language. Carolina serves with me on the CAVE Board of Directors as the Region 3 representative for the Los Angeles area. Mickie is a board certified behavior analyst and an appointed member of the executive board for the Pioneers Division of the Council for Exceptional Children and serves on the editorial board for the Journal of Preventing School Failure, the Journal of Gang Research, and Multiple Voices for Ethnically Diverse Exceptional Learners. As an advocate for safe schools and mental health, her research focus surrounds issues on cyberbullying, gang crime analysis, violence in schools, as well as behavioral and function-based interventions. Please welcome Dr. Carolina Serna and Dr. Mickie Wong-Lo, your presenters for today.
Thank you very much, Elena, for that beautiful introduction. Welcome to all of you. Bienvenidos. It's a pleasure to be here with my esteemed colleague, Mickie Wong-Lo, to discuss this population of students that for many of you, and maybe not for my colleagues in special ed, but for many of us, duly identified students, it's possibly a new term that we don't know enough about. And so our objective with today's presentation is to help you to understand who is this population of students and how can we best support them. So with that, I will begin. We've already gone through just the protocol, so if you wouldn't mind keeping your mics on mute until the end of our session, we would appreciate it. And any problems that you have with any of the technology, please communicate through the chat box. First of all, we want to begin with a description of a student who is described in a publication that's put up by the California Department of Education that provides some guidance for supporting students with special needs who are also English learners. In one section, in chapter 2, we're introduced to Cruz, a second grader born in the United States, identified as a native speaker at the expanding level. What does that mean? Basically, according to the descriptors on the LPAC, the expanding level means that she's acquiring that social English and developing CALP. So for many of you, you kind of get an idea of what that means. The chapter further describes Cruz as fluent in everyday English, but learning to use academic language, focusing in on being able to access content level vocabulary. So she's still very much developing her English skills. It's described that she speaks both Spanish and English in class to complete instructional tasks, and that her teacher supports her in that. She also enjoys retelling stories orally and in writing that her teacher has read to them, but she is struggling with reading. So this is the description of what her teacher is observing and the concern around reading. Oops. Duly identified students then basically refers to English learners who have a disability, a learning need of some sort, and that's as defined through the California Department of Education. English learners, as many of us know, are students who do not speak, read, write, or understand the English well as a result of English not being their home language. So many of us were in that situation, right, when we were growing up, or maybe when we arrived here in the United States. When we think about English learners, it's often the case that we might just lump this category of students into this title, but we want to encourage you to think about the distinction, the differences. These are just two examples that as elementary, secondary school teachers, we need to be aware of. There are students in our classrooms who are migratory English learners, oftentimes referred to as perhaps migrant students. The population of migrant students, of course, is higher in certain regions in the Central Valley, on the Central Coast in Northern California, a little more so than in Southern California, but we certainly also have students, migrant students in this area as well. And they often experience relocation and adaptation to new schools as a result of their parents moving for employment. They also then are separated from friends, communities. They often also have a lower socioeconomic status. Another population are the newcomer immigrant English learners, and they are dealing with some of the same situation and some of the same challenges as the migrant students, but they are also dealing with acculturation issues. And again, these will vary depending on the age of entry into the United States, the age of migration here. Language learning can be a huge issue again, and it will vary depending on their age. If they're very young and are able to enter a preschool program or kindergarten, those issues may not be as serious as for a newcomer student who comes to this country and enters the school setting in the 4th, 5th, or 6th grade, or even older. So as a result, again, depending on the age, there will be loss of connection with friends and family in the home country, resettlement issues, dealing with the immigration process, and many others. Again, these are just a couple of characteristics. I didn't mention it here, but we also have long-term English learners, right? Many students who have, in many cases, born here in the United States, but who never seem to, who are in a difficult situation, moving beyond that intermediate level of English language acquisition. So a little bit of just to set the context, ELs here in California represent 18.5% of the total K-12 population, which is at around 6 million. 81% of them speak Spanish as their primary language, which is probably no surprise to many of us. In LA County, for example, of the total number of English learners, 84% speak Spanish, followed by 3% speaking Mandarin, 2.5% speaking Armenian, and then Cantonese and Korean representing the top 5 languages spoken in LA County. Now, some of you might wonder, well, where did they get this data? And so if that's your question, as it was mine when I first looked at this information from DataQuest, this is information reported through the schools on the forms that go home with the parents. And it is then used to develop the R30 report at the state level. Now, having said that, some of you who are in the schools working in different capacities might know that certain languages, certain linguistic realities in the home environment may not be reflected in this data. So some parents, even though they speak Spanish in the home, do not report this information. So again, I think we need to look at, this is the official data, but it may be an undercount in some areas. Orange County, just for comparison, again, 77% of the ELs speak Spanish. And here the languages are still 3 Asian languages and then Arabic as well. And again, what's wonderful about DataQuest, if you haven't used it, is you can get data very quickly at the state level, county level, district level, and even school level. And so now I turn it over to my colleague, Mickie.
Thank you. It's one of the wonderful thing about in California is that is such a diverse definition of diversity in terms of language, and just I'm learning from Dr. Serna all the time. I feel like I'm the immigrant person that came into a new country and learning. I remember it was just such a struggle coming in and trying to understand. My family speak Cantonese, so that 1.47% earlier. But at the same time, I think many of you probably can also relate the use that experience when you were entering to school as a young child. It makes a huge impression on you because you don't understand the English language, but at the same time, you really want to be a part of the community, right? So one of the interesting thing about when Dr. Serna approached in collaborating in this presentation is the idea of understanding special education and how there are many times in the field of special education, there are a higher increase of over identification and also under identification of students in special education or special education services. So one approach that I was sharing with Dr. Serna is that because of time, I think the most important aspect that I wanted to cultivate for this presentation is the idea of prevention. How do we, as a team or as a family, how do you get to the point where we want to make sure that whoever the student is or whoever the child is that is being considered into the special education system have gone through the trajectory of um, um, referral process that before that all options has been exhausted, every element, every intervention has been implemented to ensure that we are almost 99.9% confident that this individual do in fact need additional services in special education. So and so that's where my hub of the presentation is, and it's going to be really quick because there's a lot of information, but I hope that it will give you some insights on some of the key element of looking at special education. So in special education, when a family, or in our case, crews or family indicate there's some element that they feel like their daughter or their son or their student are not really getting their needs met in their schooling. So one of the important element within the school system is to establish a multidisciplinary team. What I mean by that is that basically as a big group of people working together, making decision regarding the specific students that are in question, looking at assessment to determine if this individual student has potential eligibility for special education. So after that, and then they determine if the academic difficulties is really a manifestation of their disability. So is it really a disability, or is it the challenges of being as an English language learner? I think move back to one more the slide before that, Dr. Serna.
Yes, let me go back to
That's okay.
Oops.
So I think that's one of the key elements within the multidisciplinary team is that you have to figure out, is this academic or behavioral challenges that's happening in the classroom or within the home environment? Is it really truly a result of the disability? Or is there something about just learning or trying to customize within the English language environment? That's when they start exhibiting behavior or having academic learning difficulties that has nothing to do with disability. So that's something that has to be discussed, has to be assessed. And one of the really important part of a multidisciplinary team, which is in the name, is that you have to involve everyone as much as possible. So the general education teacher, the English language learner themselves, the student is always really important to be a part of the team. And the family to be a part of the team. And also the special education personnel or anybody within have some knowledge base about this individual student that should be a part of the community. I think there are times when I was in practice, there are times where we actually invited grandparents, like family, extended family into the team, because we found out that most of the time they spend majority of the time after school in their grandparents' homes or their uncles and aunts and uncles' homes, where they can give us some really rich information that we would never have gotten if they're not a part of the team. So I think everybody should be invited. Everybody has a voice, and they have so much really imperative information to give us a holistic evaluation of this individual student that we're trying to provide additional support. So again, I think we were talking about collaborative approach. Is the whole idea is to ensure that this English learner is receiving the most effective academic support as possible, and to kind of steer away any indication of misidentification, or if they really do truly need identification for special education services, this is the place to discuss this element. So next slide, please. Thank you. So again, researchers talk about the pre-referral process. So in special education, you hear a lot pre-referral. So basically it's the step before we start talking more in depth about the special education services specifically for the child. So some of the researchers talk about 2 pre-referral intervention steps prior to referring the child to special education. So these are the 2 elements that is best practices that should be done. And one of them is to analyze the school environment. What are the curriculum that's currently in place? Are these curriculum relevant? Are they updated? Are we still using 20 years ago curriculum? Are these curriculum even fair to students that are from another country? And I remember when I first came into the United States, even when it was in 3rd grade, I still remember there are things within my worksheet that I have no idea what they were. Like looking at snow or going hiking or anything like that. For me, I came from Hong Kong, and I don't have snow. We don't see snow. So that idea is not relevant to my knowledge. It doesn't mean that I don't understand it. It's that I never was exposed to it. So that's some of the things that we have to look at first within the school setting, is looking at the fundamental curriculum, what is being taught, and then also looking at the English learners or intervention within the multi-tiered system of support. And I'm sure you all have heard MTSS, looking at the school-wide initiative, looking at screening, observing intervention, and also tracking progress throughout time for the student. And within the pre-referral data, some of the elements that we should always keep in mind is looking at the student's cumulative file, the entire student file that they have, any extrinsic factor, like I said earlier, are they living with another relatives after school? Are they in a currently going through a divorce? Is there something going on within the home life? Are they a part of a community that might need additional resources? And also, again, intervention summary. There should be already have some type of intervention in place, and looking at the data that has come out of it as well. So next slide. Thank you. Again, looking at some consideration relating to eligibility for special education, school environment that we talked about earlier, English language acquisition level, looking at the student's current English language capacity in the classroom, identifying the differences between acquisition delay and acquisition potentially relating to the disability. Again, cumulative file, looking at everything within the student file from the very beginning to up to the point you open the case. Extrinsic factor, is a student going through some medical issues? Is there homelessness involved? Looking at any factor impacting learning. Reviewing previous intervention like we talked about earlier. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is really a great tool, and Dr. Serna talked about earlier that we retrieve a lot of really great information from the guideline that was published by the California Department of Education, and we'll share that, and it's a part of the end of our slide. So basically, this is just one snapshot of what they were doing in terms of comparing language differences versus disability. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but this one is just a snapshot on looking at oral comprehension and listening. So on the left-hand column, or at least on my left, it is learning behavior manifested. So the first line says students does not respond to verbal direction. and the middle looking at the indicators of a language difference due to second language acquisition. So it kind of looking at if the student lacks of understanding of vocabulary in English, but demonstrate understanding in level 1 of the acquisition. And then further on is the indicator of a possible learning disability. So the student is consistently demonstrate confusion when given verbal directions in level 1 and 2, maybe due to processing deficit or low cognition. So when you start looking at these pattern of behavior, you can see that from the middle, looking at the indicator of language differences versus indicator of possible learning disabilities, you see, for me as a behavior analyst, I look at the key word. There's a lack of understanding. So it's kind of like sporadic, but then looking at indicator of possible learning disability, you see the word consistently, right? So there's a pattern that no matter what's going on, there's always something is coming up that causes the students a little bit of a challenge or a barrier to progress in their learning. Next one, please. So the next slide is looking at the behavior itself, and I'm a huge believer that academic and behavior goes hand in hand. If you're not getting the needs met in academically, behavior will happen, and if the behavior is not managed, academic will be a suffering as well. So, so behavior sense, you're looking at the students' behavior. The students appears to be very inattentive or easily distracted. And then the indicator of learning differences due to second language acquisition. The student does not understand instruction in English due to the level of English language proficiency. Then over to the right would be the indicator of possible learning disability is, again, the student is inattentive across environment. So you see the pattern that is happening across different classroom, different location, even when language is comprehensible, but maybe attention deficit. So those are the highlight that I want to leave you with is that you're looking at the pattern. If a student start exhibiting something that's happening just isolated, yeah, maybe you should take a look at it. But when it gets into a pattern and you see it over and repeat over and over time in different locations, that it generalized across setting, that in itself become more of an alarm where you should take a look a little bit more closely on what is really happening on the student. So this one, I'm not going to go into detail because it's really small, but I just wanted to share with you that in the back of the guidebook from the California Department of Education, they have this really wonderful decision-making process chart or a table that I'm a visual learner. And when I see this, I get really excited because it tells you exactly where to go. So looking at, from the very beginning, you ask these key questions and if you did that, yes, or if you haven't done it, no, and it gives you intervention or suggestion in what to do next. So that's something I wanted to leave you all with when you go through this decision-making process for your student or for your child in this sense. So next one. Yep, that's it. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mickie. So here as we get ready to wrap up our presentation, we want to consider implications. What are some things that can be done at each level, at the district level, within the schools, teachers, parents? And again, these are suggestions, recommendations that Mickie and I identified. There are many other things, but I think it's important at the district level to find out, to connect with a migrant education program that may be already that exists, and there may be a liaison with the school if you're a teacher, and parents, you can ask about these types of programs. Is there a migrant education program? How can I connect with somebody that's involved, and how can I then receive support for my child? A newcomer center, again, some districts have them, some even at the school level, there might be a newcomer classroom. These again are resources that might be in place, and it's important to identify them. And again, there may be other resources, but these are two that we wanted to focus in on. For teachers, again, there are a number of pedagogical approaches that will help support students, because again, we want to think of students more holistically as learners that happen to be learning English and happen to have a learning need possibly. And again, you might be a teacher of a student like Cruz who you don't yet know if there is a learning need, but you're noticing that they're really struggling. And because Cruz was at that expanding level, it's possible that that was a very developmental language acquisition situation where eventually she will move beyond that and be able to understand what she's reading and read more fluently if that was the issue. But using culturally and linguistically sustaining pedagogy is going to be very important. So again, we've heard several of the speakers talk about aspects of culturally and linguistically sustaining pedagogy. Dr. Jim Cummins talked about the importance of connecting the content with the students' needs, connecting the content, the reading, whatever it is that you're teaching, with the student's culture, with things that the student might be interested in, introducing reading and so forth, selecting books that will connect with the students. So, and that was a theme, that's a thread I've noticed that's repeated time and again through several of our presenters. Kathy Escamilla and her colleague also highlighted the importance of making the learning connect with the student, making it relevant. Integrated and designated ELD, of course, is going to be important because, again, we know that Cruz and other students that might be in the situation that she was in may be learning English, as we saw that she was. And so within the academic day, then it's important as teachers that you're able to dedicate that time for designated ELD, but that throughout the day, throughout the content areas, whether you're teaching English language arts, math, social studies, science, that you are giving special attention to making the content comprehensible, to focusing in on vocabulary development, targeting that instruction to the students' English language developing skills, right, depending on which level of language development they're at. And then something that I recently read about is this idea of explicit collaborative translation. And this is something that I read in the work of Nadine Rees at Sacramento State, working in collaboration with a local teacher in the area, where they did a qualitative study in Miss Cano's 4th grade classroom, where children were reading English, bilingual children were reading bilingual books. And at one point, they describe an interesting vignette right in the introduction where the students are reading a bilingual book and they're reading in a small group. And so they are taking turns. They were given the choice to select the book that they wanted and then to figure out how they would read the book. They could use either language. In their case, it was either English or Spanish. And at one point, one of the children in the group says, wait a minute, I don't understand. Can we translate? And at that moment, then the group leader decided that one of them was going to read, or that they were going to start all over and read it in Spanish so that the student could understand. But so Rees actually cites the work of others who introduced this notion of collaborative translation. She also acknowledges that this is a method that a lot of times within the bilingual ed circles has been questioned, right? We all know that we're not supposed to be doing simultaneous translation in our instruction. We've been trained that way, but she challenges that notion and suggests that perhaps this approach can be useful if it's targeted and if it's in a very specific for specific tasks throughout the academic day. So again, it's something for us to consider, right? And so I invite you to look at the work that Nadine Rees has been doing, which again is very, very helpful. She's coming out of the field of special education as well, but also looking very much at the issues related to English learners. And again, for parents, some of the implications are very similar to at the district level, that you become informed, that you ask questions. You may not know what questions to ask, but with the secretary at the school, you can begin to ask questions about what programs are available that I might be able to even benefit from. In some cases, some of the programs like the Migranet program and Newcomer Center programs also offer ESL classes for parents or assistance to help train parents to read with their children and so forth. So there are, again, a number of resources. And even for students, we need to encourage them, empower them to ask questions, to ask for the things that they think that they need, right? So if we notice, obviously that student in the article by Cano and Ruiz, the student didn't understand. So he had the courage to say, wait a minute, I don't understand. Can we translate? He knew that that was a specific tool, if you will, or something that would help him to understand the book. And his peers were able to help him with that. So again, we hope that this has been a presentation that has helped to just begin to introduce this whole notion of dually identified students and how we need to think very intentionally about their specific academic needs and learn ways to support them. So at this point, I think
we have about 10 minutes left, Dr. Serna.
Yes, so 10 minutes left. We did want to, and Dr. Wong-Lo, I want to invite you if you wanted to add anything before we open up for questions.
No, I'm good. I'm ready for questions.
Okay.
It went by so fast. I feel like we just went through so much. I just gave so much information to everyone. So
Yes. We went through this very quickly, but we also want to just point out that in our presentation, we did include that several of those resources. So we'll come back to the questions, but I just want to point out that we do have the links to especially that document, that handbook that Dr. Wong-Lo located, the California's Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. That is extremely useful. And there's just sections very detailed sections that talk also about the socio-emotional components of trying to navigate through that process where students are, again, they're dealing with language learning, and then they might be also dealing with an information processing issue or some other learning need. And so there are specific recommendations for teachers, for parents. So again, a very useful resource. And then you've got a couple of other citations there. You've got the information about the article by Professor Nadine Rees as well. So at this point, we'd like to invite you to share or comment. Some of you might you might have other very good suggestions for working with parents or students or colleagues in the schools to support students in this situation. So we'd like to welcome your questions at this point. Thank you.
I have a question. I think you already responded this, but I will give you that. These are great recommendations for identify whether EL should be referred for ESPED services. Do you have recommendation on how to best support students that they are already dually identified?
Dr. Wong-Lo, would you like to start, and then I can?
Yeah, I think, Dr. Serna, you already touched upon it in terms of, I think for special education or students, within that, I think relevance and your context of your lesson or your any teaching material and any type of support has to be relevant and has to be understandable for the student themselves. I think for students with disability, it depends on what category of disability fundamentally. But I think within the process, I think the most important part is the IEP goals. When you are within the special education meeting and you're developing IEP goals, you have to make sure that these goals are measurable and observable, but at the same time, culturally relevant for our students in English learners and their needs. And I think that's where I see a lot of discrepancy in the field when we assume that we can just do a more blanket type of IEP goal development or just assume that this would be okay. But But researchers found that, you know, every child is very different, and students, if coming from different background, has a very different unique needs. And the way to tackle that, at least from my experience, is to make sure that your IEP goal is stated very explicitly, very measurable, to the point where it's still relevant to apply within their culture, within their home, as well, because you want the student be able to carry that learning skills across different settings, right? So I think that's where my recommendation for if we get into the detail of accommodating for students with disability.
Okay, another question is, any recommendation when EL students has been identified with a disability and support system are all in English?
Yeah, so the question being that those recommendations are provided only in English and they're not provided, for example, in Spanish. Is that right, Alma? On the question. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that would actually be a huge concern, and that would need to, I would imagine, and Dr. Wong-Lo, you might have a better understanding of that, but that those goals need to be translated. And ideally, there would have been an interpreter within that IEP meeting. So starting from, I understand those documents are very technical, very difficult to translate, but I believe under IDEA, that is the requirement.
Yeah, I think it is, you know, it is definitely not the best practice without an interpreter, especially, and it is the under assumption that the family should be involved. So any, you know, IEP, any relating special education documentation is legally bounded. So I think it is in the best interest of the entire team that the family are involved, but at the same time, you have to consider the language, the primary spoken language. So when we see that it's only delivered in English, then that became a concerning factor to provide services that's appropriate. Yeah.
And this is a huge issue. And in Dr. Wong-Lo, you might have more insight into this, but with the increasing diversity, even here in California, throughout the country, and additional languages, some of my research has been with parents who speak indigenous languages. They're not speaking Spanish very well, much less English. And so when they're invited into these meetings, what kind of support is provided? That's a huge issue. And again, it goes back to why this presentation we felt was very important as well, because many students are being identified incorrectly. And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? If the student is developing their language, then there has to be much care in terms of how the identification for special needs is conducted, which is what Dr. Wong-Lo addressed.
I think the one thing I wanted to just leave is the importance that a lot of family, even including my own family, I don't think my parents would understand the special education process in the state. It is very complicated, and I'm still learning about it. And I think that is something that we have to be, as practitioner or even as educators across board, we have to be very cognizant that we have to make sure we don't use the jargon, the jargon in the field. We have to be very careful and very sensitive to the needs of explaining the process for each family so they would understand legally their rights for themselves to be protected, and the services that's available for them that they might not be aware of. I think that's where a lot of time family do not want to reach out, or they are being led into this flood of misidentification when really they could have been protected very, very beginning if somebody had taken the effort to explain the process to them and understand what is really happening. So
the last question, because it's almost time. What if the resource teacher and aides only speak English? What if the content in the resource classroom is presented in English and a student does not have literacy in their home language?
Yeah, that's a huge issue. And I still recall teaching as a third grade teacher in a bilingual program, the students that were in the resource program, and all of them were English learners from what I recall, when they went with the resource teacher, everything was in English, even though they were in a bilingual program. And at that time in the 90s, that was a recommendation and now some things are changing. I don't have enough an expertise to know what is happening in all of the districts. What are the guidelines around that? Dr. Wong-Lo, you might have some more insight, but I do see, again, in the literature, such as the study that I shared, that there is more of a welcoming of using the primary language, because the students need to be allowed to use the resources that they bring to the learning, and that is their native language until they have enough of the target language in English. I think we're almost out of time. Is that right? I just want to thank you very much for joining us before we get automatically turned off. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for spending.
Thank you both so much for being with us today. Thank you to all of our attendees or members who are here today. It was such an important topic with wonderful information and just so relevant to what I know schools face every day. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll have a 10-minute break before the next session. Please make sure to visit our website and cabe2021.org with the schedule information. I'll be closing the room now. Thank you, everyone.
Yay,
Bye.
bye.